Well, let's bring in our Tuesday political panel now. Joining us from Erina on the New South Wales Central Coast is Labor Senator Deb O'Neill, and in Adelaide, Liberal member for Sturt, James Stephens. Welcome to both of you. You would have just heard some of those comments there, Deb O'Neill, from Peter Gordon from Gordon Legal, a man who's had a deep interest and deep knowledge of how the robo-debt saga has been playing out over a number of years. Is this going to turn into a lawyer's picnic, do you think, with claims and counterclaims being lodged in the court system for years to come?
Well, I think that exactly that question might have been asked of me when the class action was advancing. And that was the case that was being put by people who didn't want this matter to come to a proper airing. And there was a lack of support when people continued to be characterised as cheaters against their own nation. And what we saw in all of the hearings that I was a part of, both in estimates and also in hearings through the Community Affairs Committee in the Senate, was just the most gross failure of public office that could be imagined. It was a train wreck being revealed night after night in the Senate, as we heard from Catherine Campbell and others who were in strident denial of what were the facts that were absolutely emerging at the time. So I think we shouldn't, lightly put away the words of the Commissioner that this was a crude and cruel mechanism. It was neither fair nor legal, and it made people feel like criminals. And that's exactly what they said when they were giving evidence, including a teacher who was in tears before the committee. I've worked for 40 years, I've raised 4 children, I've always stayed within the law. I've spent 3 years of my retired life trying to prove that I didn't owe this because I did all the paperwork correctly. That's the story of 500,000 Australians who were pursued, and I just want to take the opportunity to acknowledge, on this occasion, because it's the first chance I've had to speak about it, Jenny Miller, who's Reece Calzo's mum, and he was one of the young people who was literally pursued to his death by debt collectors for a debt raised against him by his own government led by Mr Morrison, and he just couldn't stand the pressure anymore. If there's redress that can come to these individuals, if the thought of misfeasance can hold to account the people who constructed it, then it should be advanced, and we shouldn't mock it, we shouldn't deride it, we should be all on board, because this historic failure can never happen again.
James Stephens, as Deb O'Neill points out there, this Royal Commission, scathing, damning, whatever adjective you want to use, it doesn't seem to quite sum up what it's outlined here as to the behaviour of multiple ministers and the department and others involved in this scheme. Does it seem fair that there should be avenues for further compensation opened up to those who suffered as a result?
Yes, definitely. I think that the government should facilitate a process to determine appropriate compensation. Obviously, there's the common law process that some might be exploring as well. It's up to the government to decide whether they want to make that more straightforward and easier for people that are entitled to compensation, and I'd certainly support them providing adequate settlement to people that are entitled to it.
When it comes to the ongoing tenure of someone like Scott Morrison in Parliament, James Stephens, is it appropriate for him to remain a member of this establishment when such findings have been made against him? Findings that he disputes, but regardless of that, is his position in Parliament feasible considering what's been said about his conduct in this matter?
Well, yes. I mean, he's the duly elected member for the seat of Cook, and there's no grounds for a member of Parliament to be hounded out of the Parliament. You serve your full term. It is the case, obviously. We do respect when former Prime Ministers often make the decision to leave Parliament and create a by-election. That's a decision for him to make. I don't think the grounds are there that because of any findings through this that people void their seat in the Parliament. The people of Cook deserve to be represented like the people in my seat of Sturt and the other 151 electorates, and I don't think we want to get into a circumstance where executive related matters that play out, and we're only really halfway through elements of this, see a consequence of someone having to leave the parliament. That's not how our system is established whatsoever.
Deb O'Neill, would you think that Scott Morrison should be considering his future as an MP as a result of these findings?
Well, look, it's always up to the person in that role who's been so roundly condemned for his association with this robo-debt debacle. It's always in his gift to determine what he's going to do. I mean, he is elected and I respect democracy, but the reality is, let's not be unclear about who constructed the scheme. Right, it was Mr. Morrison. And who continued to operate it even after the matters had advanced to a point where the ridiculous term, it wasn't even to say it was illegal, it was legally insufficient, was the word game that was sanctioned by the departments under the leadership of the former Prime Minister. Now, you know, he should be having a good hard look at himself. And even if you have to go and ask Jenny for a bit of advice, he should be thinking very, very hard and long about his role in robo-debt. And then what follows from that is a matter for Mr. Morrison to determine himself. But nobody should be under any illusion about who was there at the start and who continued it and who was there at the end. Robo-debt is a creation of Scott Morrison.
Speaking of matters of accountability, an area that you have been very closely following over the last couple of months, Deb O'Neill, is the PwC tax saga. We've had a development in the last 24 hours or so with the firm announcing that it won't be making any more political donations as a result of the scrutiny that it is under. Is that an appropriate course of action?
Well, I don't think it's got anything to do with the accountability that it has to the Australian people about providing a creche, you know, a welcome spot for one of their senior tax partners to take confidential information from the Australian government and its taxpayers, take that back into PwC, create a product so big that it was called Project North America, and then sell it on to the biggest multinational companies in the world to try and avoid paying tax in Australia. Like, that is what PwC need to deal with. This decision to do with donations is absolutely nothing to do with the scrutiny that they are under with regard to their behaviour. They're on completely different tracks.
James Stephens, is it appropriate for political parties to be accepting these sort of big donations from consulting firms, be they PwC, be they any of the other big four, considering that when in governments of various political persuasions are making decisions about awarding them contracts that are worth millions and millions of dollars?
Look, I honestly am not aware of any specifics of donations from those consultancies. My general understanding is that they tend to, when they do make contributions, make them evenly across the parties. So, frankly, whether they cease them or not, I don't see being relevant. I agree with Deb. If they're making that statement to suggest that that's some kind of, great development in them learning the error of their ways on something completely unrelated, then I'm certainly not prepared to let them off the hook and suggest that that's got anything to do with the scandal that's engulfed them over the past few months.
Let's move on to one last topic before we lose both of you. It does seem like we're going around the world today in our discussion, but we've been focusing quite a lot on the negotiations between Australia and the European Union on this free trade deal. A wiser head than mine once uttered the words, "Blessed be the cheesemakers." But James Stephens, are we going to see the cheesemakers lose out in any sort of deal with the EU?
Well, I hope not. I haven't got the best personal history of dealing with the Europeans on trade, being from the wool sector. They've been notoriously difficult to our farmers for many, many decades, and so I've got a bit of a bias against coming to an agreement with Europe that compromises in any way after the treatment our agricultural sector has suffered ever since the common market began back in the early 70s, and I stand with the Farmers Federation. I don't think we should just bend over for any deal. We should only take the right deal, and if it's not good and in the interests of Australia, then it's not worth signing up to.
Deb O'Neill?
Well, my good friend and incredible negotiator, Senator Don Farrell, is over there doing the very best he can for Team Australia, and I'm very proud that follows the work done by Murray Watt just a couple of weeks ago in terms of the agriculture in particular. The National Farmers Federation standing strong. Team Australia's over there doing a very, very good job to make sure that we get the best possible deal for our nation. And I'm very proud that the government is saying we won't just settle for anything. I mean, this is a market that is aligned with us in terms of its disposition for the rule of law. A like-minded partner in trade, I think, is a critical partner in these times of geopolitical uncertainty. And if we look at the scale of the market and the opportunity over there, I think it's I want to get this number right, $24 trillion is the GDP, 450 million customers over there. It's absolutely worth us getting the deal right to make sure that our product, our incredible produce coming out of Australia, particularly in the ag sector, I think we've got $69 billion that goes overseas. Only 8% of that is currently going to Europe. So there's room for great Australian produce to become part of what people can access right across the EU. And I know that that team over there, very ably led by Senator Farrell, will be doing everything it can to advance the interests of the nation.
Well, Deb O'Neill, James Stephens, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks very much,
Matthew.
Matt.